Hey everyone, another day, another budget retro gaming handheld to review, with this one taking more than a little bit of inspiration from Sony's upcoming PlayStation Portal. This handheld is named Project X and comes in at around the $30 to $35 mark. Inside the box, other than the handheld itself, the Project X comes with a USB-C charging cable alongside a mini HDMI to HDMI cable and a small instruction booklet. In terms of specs, the Project X has a quad-core ATM7051 CPU inside, with emulators from arcade up to PlayStation 1, though the Project X certainly struggles to play anything even remotely taxing from the PlayStation catalogue, and struggles with some GBA and Super Nintendo games. The Project X comes with 2 gigs of RAM, a 4.3-inch IPS screen at a 800 by 480 resolution, a 2500 mAh battery that gets around the 4-hour mark of playtime, weighs in at around 380 grams, and comes with an updated version of the same old budget firmware we've seen many times before. Straight out of the box, there's no getting around just how glossy the Project X is. The handheld is super shiny from pretty much any direction and so becomes a fingerprint magnet very quickly, although the plastic's so glossy that the fingerprints are at least very easy to clean. On top, we've got the power button, volume rocker, USB-C charger, controller and micro HDMI ports, as well as a micro SD slot. On the front, we've got a very PlayStation-inspired control layout, including clicking joysticks and little LEDs next to the screen. On the back, we've got a huge amount of fingerprints already, alongside the stereo speaker grills, which are very much a challenge not to touch when you are gripping the controller. As you can probably hear, we also have quite a bit of rattle as associated with these budget handhelds. So, moving on to the controls. The Project X is actually quite comfy in the hands, or it would be if it wasn't so slippery due to how glossy the plastic is anyway. The shoulder buttons are quite responsive, with a good press range in almost all areas, and the triggers aren't analog at all, but at the very least are easy to press with no sharp plastic used. The face buttons are actually quite nice. They're nowhere near as glossy as the rest of the shell and have a nice press to them, while also being pretty responsive. They're a nice size too, and although they still feel like a budget handheld, I have seen a lot worse. Speaking of a lot worse, the D-pad is absolutely terrible. They've replicated the PlayStation teardrop style, but it lacks any of the accuracy of what it's trying to imitate. The glossy inputs mixed with the gloss shell just means that my thumb slides all over the place when trying to use it, and there's just nowhere near enough centre gap to get your bearings. The joysticks are almost okay, but are almost completely flat and paired with very limited travel, so it feels like a challenge when using it for anything that requires any form of accuracy. Moving on to the firmware, we've seen the base of this firmware many times on a number of budget handhelds on the channel, although this seems to be the latest version of it that we've seen yet. In terms of a home screen, it's laid out with some classic arcade games on the centre and right screens, with the emulators all sorted on the left screen. The Project X has 8 gigs of internal memory that seems to be full of ROMs, although there are hundreds upon hundreds of repeats, which really makes navigation a bit of a chore. Other than the games, you have apps for video, music, photos, ebooks, calculator, stopwatch, theme swap, settings and a file browser included. It's all super bare bones, but it is just about functional, just made worse for all of the ROM repeats. It's also worth noting that both the screen and audio quality is pretty low too, so you're not going to get any enjoyment from watching videos on the handheld in the first place. In-game, the firmware does allow you to save and load states, change the input settings on the chosen emulator, as well as setting the screen ratio to full screen or scale to screen, which is always great to see. Anyway, I'll cut to some gameplay footage now and summarise back up at the end. So the Project X doesn't quite hit the mark, which is a shame, as I think with a little bit more effort placed in, it likely had the potential to be a pretty good budget handheld. As it is though, the ruined teardrop D-pad, super restrictive joysticks, and the most glossiest shiny shell that we've seen yet stop it from being a recommendation from me, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on it regardless. That's it from me though, thanks so much for watching.